Hello, 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 wherever you are at. Whether this is good morning, good afternoon, or good night. Who says that? Good morning, good afternoon, good night. Is that Will Ferrell and Anchorman? You guys will have to let me know who that is or who says that. Anyways, let's dive into a subject that has been. It's something that I regularly talk to with my clients. I don't know if I talk about this a lot publicly about stuff that I talk with clients about, but they're besides, close friends or a family member or whatnot, my clients are pretty much the majority of my life because that is my job. Most of our jobs are the majority of our lives. And my job just happens to be working as it stands right now. I mean, I've had numerous ways in this performance field, but as it stands right now, my job is primarily working one-on-one in very intimate settings with, I don't know, we can consider, society would definitely consider them high performing people. They're just people. But their profession is considered high performance and they're performing at a high level, right? And I've never, as I've done this more and more, I don't necessarily think, like, am I a high performer? I don't know. It's potentially subjective, right? It's like, what is high performance? Can you be a high performer bartender? Does the, does, is high performance considered the money that you make? Can you be a high performing fifth grade teacher? It's just fascinating how we don't perceive that, right? We look at high performers as like a very successful entrepreneur. These are my opinions. I could be wrong. This is just what I think. I think society thinks generally. High performers are actors and athletes. I'm just trying to think of something outside of athletes, but athletes is obviously just one. High level coaches, those sort of things. Anyways, that's besides the point. The point is that I work with a few people and we have very intimate conversations alongside some breath work and certain modalities that we use to keep them healthy. But a lot of stuff is framed around mental frameworks, philosophy. A lot of things that I think about as in life of my craft, the thing that I'm trying to hold space for is one, mental frameworks, which requires questions, conversation. You have to beat up your thoughts essentially. And that just gets bucketed into a philosophy. And so it's trying to not necessarily always poke holes, it's just trying to hold up a mirror to people. And that's best by serving questions. You serve up questions to allow people to work through their thoughts. Thinking about thinking, the old metacognition phrase. And then you have the physicality, right? Which is the modalities. Movement, balance, hot, cold, thermoregulation, circadian rhythm, all those sort of things. Anyways, the topic that is so consistent with me and the people that I work with, it's based off of, obviously it's clearly based off of my practices. That's part of the reasons why they're hiring me. But I filter everything into two buckets. I try to use the yin and yang duality system that we're contracted in the experience of life, and I try to mix that into a term of metaphysics. Metaphysics, one of my favorite principles of metaphysics, is creating somethingness from nothingness or something from nothing. And so then what is nothing? And my understanding of nothing is its essence. It's the spiritual aspect of life. It's the soul, right? So something has soul. And then there's the ego, which is wrapped in duality. So it's contracted into balancing paradox. And so when you think of high performing people, back to what I'm saying, it's just now that I'm no longer contemplating philosophically what high performing is, we're going to act that we all agree tremendously that high performers are professional athletes, and we'll call them high CEOs and musicians and artists, right? That's what I'm stamping on this show. It's my show, Mom with Mart. I'm stamping that as the high performer. That's the definitive high performer. So the high performer most likely is being exposed publicly, right? They are being performers in the public eye. If we tailor that specifically towards pro athletes only, they're performing their art, their craft spontaneously in the public eye. Where I mean spontaneous is that you don't know the result, right? It's a little bit easier to know if you're watching a movie how the movie is going to end. You know, there's going to be a beginning, middle, and end, and you kind of have an idea of how it's going to end. Sports is so fascinating for the fans because it's a reality TV show that happens in real time. You don't know who's going to win the game. Now, I would have always said that it's spontaneous in music, but I've been around some musicians over the last couple of years, and it was crazy. I was with one of the bass players of a band maybe a year ago. I don't remember now. And he said after a show, we were in what do they call them, the green rooms? We were in whatever their room is after the show, and he was talking about how he missed like 5 notes in concert. I was standing right there on the edge of the stage the whole time. I clearly didn't notice. I was just jamming, rocking. And it was weird because it made me think about that's like what a baseball player says all the time after a game, or a hockey player. Like, I missed that pass or I missed that pitch. And you just don't see that in the eye of the fan or the listener in that scenario. So it's clear that they're trying to reach perfection. And I guess as I'm saying that, I would maybe bucket uh, the musician into the world of spontaneity, even though you kind of know if you go to a concert, they're going to play these songs. You kind of already like them. You know how long it's going to be. Obviously, there's encores and there's freedom to that, but you sort of have an idea. In baseball, you have no idea. You can go, or hockey, you have no idea. You can go to your game and a team could upset the other team and crush them, right? Coaches are different. Coaches are hard sometimes to work with. They're which is a more favorite, but they're sometimes my favorite conversations because I'm a coach. So talking strategy and philosophy is a little bit more relevant in the coaching world because you are doing all the strategies. You're not doing any of the physical stuff. So I enjoy it. It just makes it a lot harder sometimes to have conversations with coaches because the hardest part about being a coach is that you don't do the performance. So coaches usually are wrapped in a lot of anxiety because they don't have control over the outcomes. They essentially just have to watch it and see how things are unfolding. They're trying to make decisions and move the strategy based off of the information that they've received. So you're trying to receive as much information and be as prepared as possible to make a decision about the future, right? And you're trying to do that all the time. But it's all performance under pressure. And it's really fascinating. But when I go to the metaphysics, one of the things that I always talk with all of these males and females about is how do they balance paradox? How do you balance the ego? How do you understand good and bad? And as I think of one of the coaches that I talk with regularly, he's a head coach, and it's fascinating because it's hard. You can't do an interview and not be judged by whether or not you won or lost that game. And so if you lose the game, it doesn't matter how well you played. You lost. It was bad. If you won the game, it doesn't matter how bad you played. You won the game. It was good. It's hard, right? I've seen this a lot in baseball my whole career, is that a lot of times in baseball, you see a baseball player who has 4 at bats and they hit the ball hard, all 4 at bats. And it could have been maybe a foot to the left or right, and they would have 4 hits. And in their game, they executed their bets brilliantly and they dominated. But they didn't get a hit because of unlucky situations or the physics and mathematics of how people are played in the field, and they end up not getting, the ball doesn't drop, so they go 0 for 4, and they're devastated because that was a bad game. Statistically, that is a bad game. Even though as a coach, they know that it was a great game. And then the paradox to that is they could have 4 hits, and all 4 hits could have been misplayed by the defense, or something lucky happens, or it takes a unique bounce, or just a little dribbler, and they have 4 hits, and even though they know they had a bad game, they're pumped. And every baseball player I've ever met in that scenario would rather have 4 bad hits than no hits and hit the ball hard every time up. And that's really interesting because sustainably, if you hit the ball hard regularly, you're going to be a good hitter. If you hit the ball hard, if you don't hit the ball hard regularly, you're going to be a bad hitter. But our brains, for some reason, for whatever reason, are wired. We're just married to this dualism. I don't know if you guys can hear my kid in the background. He's obviously not doing his afternoon nap. But it's weird to me that we have that inner ego, that we see everything through good and bad. But what's even weirder to me is that when you go beyond duality of good and bad, none of it matters because it doesn't. And then for whatever reason in life, knowing that nothing matters makes everything matter. When you can actually conceptualize the concept that none of this matters, you're playing an illusion in a game with a character. And the game isn't just the baseball game, it's life. Life is the game. You're born, you go to youth stages, you mature, and then you die. And that's like the 4 quarters, right? And you go through your quarters, you have a halftime, you have some quarter life crises here and there, you get older, you get married, you have kids, you do the whole bit. And maybe you don't do that bit, but you still have a bit, regardless of what it is. You do a thing. You get jobs, you learn those jobs, you fail, you succeed. You play in all these wrapped up paradoxes in the game, and then it ends. And the game really doesn't matter because it ends, which is what makes it all, again, fascinating. Everything that you are pursuing currently in this moment that you desire is materially made up, and it is achieving something for your ego that if you can acquire it, you will perceive as good. If you don't acquire it, you will perceive as bad. But you know that it doesn't matter. And that becomes really fascinating to talk about that with high performing people. To tell somebody that the Stanley Cup doesn't matter because it doesn't can really ruffle their feathers, right? Winning the Super Bowl is irrelevant. It doesn't really matter. However, winning the Super Bowl extremely matters. But what matters is entirely up to you, the way in which you interpret the game. And I've seen this a lot. I've seen people who make tons of money and they're not motivated by money. And somehow they just continuously make tons of money and they're not motivated by money. Then I see people who want tons of money and they don't make money. And as much as they only want to make money, they don't make money. So what is that? What is that scenario in life? But either way, it doesn't matter because both of those are paradoxical. So the confusion of trying to understand what a paradox is largely why I wrote my last book, Without Words, because beyond the game of material, which is in duality, you exist in nothingness and you can't put words to essence. You can only contemplate. So when you contemplate life in general, we get away from the high performer and we think about life in its form of nothingness. It's sort of, that's where I think nature is so powerful, because you can go sit in not nature in necessarily a city, even though I know that helps too, but I'm talking about in the middle of nowhere where it's just nature. It's not polluted or tainted by human form, right? You don't have buildings or generator sounds. You're truly in the midst of nature. Somehow it always makes sense, and you don't have to attach anything to it. You don't have to put any words to it. So we get these little doses of those understandings in our life, and we just kind of calm down. And we realize that all of the stuff in the form, the material, it doesn't matter. And nature has a really powerful way of teaching us that. It's a lot of the reason why I think people gravitate towards things like religions, because it allows you to find concreteness in faith, the unknown, and it allows you to have something to believe in, right? And I think that's where religion makes a lot of sense in so many ways. It's the reason why people do certain things for principles and have structure in their life, is to essentially make sense of the nothingness. But when you're communicating that with people, and you're watching them work through it. It's hard because high or performing people, their livelihood depends on the consistency of good. So try telling a major league coach whose job entirely relies on winning games that winning doesn't matter. Because in that profession, the only thing that matters is winning. And so if you're an athlete, you know if you win the Super Bowl 3 different times in your career, you're a Hall of Famer. And it changes your career, it makes you millions and millions of dollars more money. It gets you a way bigger status. It gets you way more resources. You have access to tremendous more things if you win. And the entire system is set up for that. And so what makes it a fun conversation to build frameworks off of is trying to understand the contract that we have through human ego, which is based off of good and bad, and having an awareness to human essence, human spirit, so that you have the ability to step outside of the game and logically study your character. That's where I think training enters into all of this, because you need both winning and losing to get deeper into awareness. And you need awareness to deepen itself so that you're wise to the knowledge of good and bad. And that's what makes metaphysics a funny little principle, because we have things inside of us of energetic forces of meaning that we don't know what it is. And if we intuitively follow it, we always turn it into something. And then once it becomes something, it's real for the world, and the world perceives it as good and bad. And we have to do that for whatever reason to have meaning out of something that's meaningless. And so then you just think to yourself, why would I pursue anything? Why would I pursue my highest self? Why would I pursue winning a Super Bowl? Why would I pursue being the best athlete, musician, business person that I can possibly be if I know it doesn't matter? The paradox of that is because it matters. And to rationally be the best that you are possibly capable of being, for whatever reason, what it does to you behaviorally is it pulls out the essence, and it makes or breaks you into its most authentic form. And when you realize how simple it is to carve into you, not to work outside of you, to carve into you, that's where I think that's the lesson of nature, is that you learn that you are the world, understanding who you are in the world, and carving into that essence of self, that soul of self, and establishing awareness is part of it's the meaning behind the game. And so when I use those examples about making money, it's sort of, that's what it is in completion, in its final form. It's trying to win 3 Super Bowls and make $200 million or however much money you can make off that, and being a Hall of Famer and winning at all cost. Because in order to do that and sustain that, you will have to be the you at its fullest form. Now, where life becomes really important to that is because in sports specifically, is that sports end. So sports is like a life inside a life. And if you're married to the money, I need to make the money, I need to make the Hall of Fame, I need to be this thing. If you're married to that egotistically entirely, and it only matters materially, then you'll materially suffer. And that's where I think you see, myself included, I went through this as a professional athlete, but I think that's why you see the lack of being able to grieve the death of a career. I think that happens to, this hasn't happened to me yet, but I think that happens to parents when they become empty nesters. I think that happens to older generations when they retire, like the baby boomers who retired at, what is it, 65, and they don't have a job. Because you have to grieve the loss of the ego. You have to grieve the loss of a character that you played in the illusion. And those are all needed for awareness. But what's sad is when you find people who they can't grieve it or kill it off and evolve and change state, change character, and they withhold as if their baseball character, football character mattered, and they hold that for the remainder of their lives. And I feel like that will be a somewhat of an invisible imprisonment. And so in order to try to help performing people become the fullest potential of who they are, you're trying to give them frameworks to allow them to acknowledge first and foremost the duality that exists, and to rationalize and logically study the good and bad and see that for what it is. And then you are trying to create a connection that goes beyond the ego, goes beyond the good and bad egotistical state. We call it awareness. You're trying to create an awareness in which someone feels comfortable enough to explore, because awareness is without words, it's indescribable, it's unknown, and it's needed to sit above the material character that you play. You have to have an awareness above the mind-body vehicle to be able to study the mind-body vehicle. And as you can do that, then you are accepting of all the things that happen within the game. The game also being used as the word life right here. And so when you can be accepting with life, you can flow in life. And that's the beauty of nature. Because when you are in nature, solely in nature, you have to accept what is, because that's what it is. You're outside of the man-made conveniences of life. You can't Uber Eat stuff. You can't have an artificial temperature gauge. You don't have your bed. You're just in nature. You just are. And that's the lesson of essence. That's where, and we have parts of that in life that help us for sure. It's beautiful. And now, does essence make you win or lose more or less? That's not the point. The point is that you need a channel or classroom that exposes you to good and bad. And you essentially are trying to choose the classroom that your character needs the most to figure itself out. And that's where I bring it all the way back home to, I do think we're all performers. Every job, every position, motherhood, fatherhood, friendship, artistic endeavors, anything that you're doing for a career path, any school that you're in, every single thing is serving as a classroom to the ego. And it's nothing more and nothing less than just the illusion needed to expand awareness. And so you can walk through life knowing that none of what you're doing matters. But because you are awareness, you are energy, you are spirit, you are the whole thing, everything matters. And so that's why I think innately we are just explorers of the universe. And I think what makes the 21st century a really unique time in life is that we're now internal explorers. We have to go inward because we've explored as far as the planet goes. I mean, obviously we're trying to get outside of the planet, but as far as the planet goes, we've explored all the physical land of Earth. And so now you're seeing a consciousness evolve into itself. And we become inward explorers. And I think that's largely why you're seeing a spiritual rise. And so as far as where we're at now in the ego, yeah, it's very important to involve spirituality into your practice, because you need both. All right, that's all I got. I can hear my kid, and I'm going to go help my wife because it sounds like she needs some help. And I love them both dearly. All right, I love you guys too. Enjoy the day and enjoy the paradox. Goodbye.